I didn't even look at the bed. I just stared at the heavy gold ring on my finger, the price tag of my family's survival, until my vision blurred and the chandelier above the master bedroom turned into a halo of trembling light. The silk at my wrists was cold and expensive. My hands were not. The skin across my knuckles was rough from years of cleaning, carrying, scrubbing, work that had never once asked me to be soft. The room was too grand to belong to someone like me. Carved ceiling roses, velvet drapes, and a marble fireplace cold enough to feel like judgment. Somewhere behind me, the last of the wedding guests' laughter had died out in the hallways of Villa Bellomo, leaving only the lake wind brushing the glass like a warning. A clock ticked over the mantel. My breathing had gone shallow enough to hear. I was not crying. I was too numb for that. Then I heard him. Not his voice. His steps. Slow, heavy, measured, as if the floor itself had to make room for Tony Bellomo, the man Milan called a monster, and the man my father sold me to, the man whose name could shut down a street, empty a bar, turn police sirens into whispers. My throat tightened. I pressed both palms to the mirror's gold frame to keep my hands from shaking, but my fingers still trembled anyway. The lace sleeves of my wedding dress were damp, where sweat had gathered under silk. I had spent the entire day smiling until my jaw ached, bowing my head like a good daughter, letting strangers kiss my cheeks, and congratulate me on a marriage that felt like a funeral. The oak doors behind me clicked shut. My stomach dropped. The sound was soft, almost polite, worse than a slam. Slams could be fought. Polite clicks were final. His shadow stretched across the carpet before he came fully into view, broad and impossible, blocking half the room's light. I didn't turn right away. I straightened first. If I was going to meet my fate, I would meet it standing. I closed my eyes. I waited for the nightmare to begin, but the first thing he said was the first time in 26 years anyone had ever treated me like a human being. "Are you cold, Liliana?" I opened my eyes so fast the room tilted. He was standing several feet behind me, not close enough to trap me, not close enough to claim space. He had removed his jacket. His white shirt was open at the throat, and the ornate black vest he had worn in the church hung loose over his massive torso like armor set down carefully. A cane, dark wood with a gold head, rested in his right hand. His face was stern, carved by years of being watched and judged, but his eyes weren't cruel. They were tired, full of an old grief. He didn't look at me with lust. He looked at me with respect. He looked like a man who had carried a mountain for a long time. I didn't answer at first because my brain didn't know how to process the question. Cold? That wasn't what monsters asked their brides. Monsters didn't wonder about comfort. Monsters didn't leave distance. I don't know, I whispered, because my voice always came out low when I was afraid. Soft, thin, too intimate for a room this large. Tony's gaze dropped to my bare shoulders, to the goosebumps rising under lace. He set his cane against a chair and crossed the room slowly, the floorboards groaning under his weight. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but where would I run? The corridor outside was guarded. The gates were locked. The lake below was black glass. And my father, somewhere in Milan, and was probably drinking, celebrating the fact that his debt had vanished with my signature. Tony stopped at the fireplace. He didn't come to me. He struck a match and lit the fire with a calmness that made my pulse stutter. Flames rolled into life, warmth blooming in the room. Then he turned back toward me and said, "You can keep the dress on if it makes you feel safer, or you can take it off if it makes you breathe. Either way, no one is coming in here tonight." I swallowed hard. No one. His jaw tightened, as if the idea of anyone touching my door offended him on a personal level. "No one," he repeated. "Not even me." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not even him? The wedding night. The moment everyone had warned me about with half-spoken terror. The moment my aunt had smirked about in the kitchen that morning when she adjusted my veil and said, "A man like that doesn't marry for love, Liliana. He marries for appetite." Appetite. I had spent the entire day imagining his appetite like a beast waiting behind his eyes. Tony Bellomo took one step closer, then stopped again, as if he was measuring how much space my fear needed. "I know what they told you about me," he said quietly. "I know what you're expecting." My breath caught. "And I know what your father sold." My spine went rigid. He walked to the bedside table, not the bed itself, and placed something on the polished wood, a small brass key, a folded piece of paper, a bottle of water. The clock kept ticking. My own breath sounded too fast, too shallow, too loud. Tony stayed where he was, leaving a respectful distance between us, and when he spoke, his voice was low enough to steady the room. "This room is yours. The door locks from the inside. In this house, you are not a debt to be paid. You are a person. I stared at the key, then at him, like I didn't understand the world anymore. He looked back at me without hunger, without triumph, without ownership, only respect. Then he nodded once toward the folded paper. "The paper is the code to the safe in the closet," he said. "Inside is a phone with 3 numbers saved. Valeria Russo, my head of security, Dr. Santi, my physician, and Veronica, my attorney." My throat burned. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to scream why. I wanted to break something just to see if reality would shatter and wake me up from this nightmare. Instead, I whispered, "Then why did you marry me?" Tony's gaze didn't flinch. He didn't pretend. He didn't soften the truth. "Because if I didn't," he said, "your father would have sold you to a crueler man by sunrise." The room went silent except for the fire crackling. I felt my knees weaken. Tony's eyes held mine. "And because I saw you once," he added. "In the rain. In Milan. You did something you didn't have to do." My chest tightened. I didn't remember doing anything worthy of a mafia boss's memory. My life was a list of things I did because I had to. Work, clean, cook, sacrifice. And kindness was usually an accident I couldn't afford. Tony looked away for a moment. "I am not what people want to look at," he said, "but I am what people want when they need something handled. Your father needed his debt erased. He offered your life as a debt to be paid. I said no. He begged. He cried. He lied. He said you would be better off with me than with the men hunting him." My stomach turned. Tony's voice dropped into steel. "Then I made him sign every paper that strips him of any claim to you. He does not own your name. He does not own your future. He does not own your body." My eyes burned, but I refused to let them fall. "I didn't agree," I whispered, because that was the truth beneath everything. No one had asked me. They had dressed me, braided my hair, walked me down the aisle like a possession being transferred. Tony nodded once. Slow. "I know," he said. He stepped back. "I will sleep in the study across the hall," he added. "If you wake up and you're afraid, you call Valeria. If you don't want anyone, you lock the door and go back to sleep. Tomorrow, we talk again, when you have eaten and rested and the world feels less like a trap." My mouth opened, but no sound came. Tony picked up his cane. Before he reached the door, he paused and looked back at me. "Liliana," he said, and my name sounded different in his voice, like it belonged to someone worth protecting. "What happened to you tonight? What they did to you? It ends here." Then he left. The door clicked shut, and I stood alone in the wedding room, staring at the ring on my finger, not understanding how the nightmare I had braced for had turned into something far more dangerous. Hope. Because hope was the thing that made women stay too long. Hope was what my mother had worn like a chain until her heart finally gave up. Hope was what my father used to keep us quiet while he gambled away grocery money with promises of one big win. Hope was not safe. I moved toward the bed then, not to lie down, but because my legs could no longer hold me. I sat on the edge of the mattress, rigid, listening. No footsteps, no return, no monster, just the crackle of the fire and the ticking clock over the mantel. Eli lifted the brass key and turned it in the lock. The click from the inside felt like the first choice I had made all day. Then, because my body didn't know what else to do with the shock, I began to shake. It took me a long time to stop. And when I finally lay down, still in my dress, veil discarded like a skin I didn't recognize, I stared at the ceiling and wondered the question that would change everything. If Tony Bellomo wasn't here to destroy me, then what was he here to do? I didn't sleep much. My mind kept replaying the church, the vows, the way my father's hand had tightened on my elbow as he walked me down the aisle like he was delivering livestock, the way the guests had stared at Tony, and then at me, their expressions split between pity and fascination. And Tony's face, stern, heavy, controlled. Not once had he looked embarrassed of his size. Not once had he tried to shrink. He had filled the church like a force of nature. Men moved aside for him automatically. Women whispered behind fans, pretending their mouths weren't wet with cruelty. And yet when he stood beside me at the altar, when the priest asked if he took me as his wife, Tony's voice had been steady. Yes, not triumphant, not possessive, just yes, as if he had accepted something he intended to honor. The sun rose over Lake Como in slow gold. The curtains turned pale. I heard birds outside the window, and for one surreal moment I forgot I was a bride trapped in a Mafia villa. Golden light spilled across the floor. Beyond the glass, the lake flashed emerald and soft orange, quiet and almost holy, beautiful, in a way that made fear feel like a stain. Then I looked at my ring and remembered. A soft knock came at my door around 8. I flinched so hard my shoulder cramped. Then a woman's voice, low, calm, said, "Signora Bellomo, it's Valeria. Breakfast is ready when you are. Signora, wife." The words tightened my throat. I didn't answer at first. I waited, listening for impatience, for anger. Instead, Valeria stayed silent, as if she understood fear like a language. "I'll leave a tray outside the door," she added gently. "No one will come in unless you ask." Footsteps retreated. I sat up slowly, heart hammering like I'd run miles. Then, because hunger didn't care about trauma, my stomach twisted painfully. I hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. The wedding food had been too rich, and my nerves too sharp. And I had smiled and sipped champagne, and watched my father shake hands with dangerous men, like he hadn't just traded my life away. A silver tray sat on the carpet. Coffee, fresh bread, butter, fruit. A bowl of warm porridge sprinkled with cinnamon, not lavish, comforting. My throat burned again. I pulled the tray inside and locked the door. I ate with my back against the bed, like a child hiding food from thieves. Every bite felt like a risk, like kindness that might be withdrawn if I didn't earn it. When I finished, I set the tray aside and walked to the closet safe. The paper Tony had left showed the code. My fingers shook as I typed it in. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside was a phone, exactly as he'd said, and beside it, a passport. My passport, not my father's, mine, and a second envelope with my name written across it in careful handwriting. Liliana. My hands went cold. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single-page contract, already signed by Tony Bellomo, stamped with his attorney's seal. It stated that I was free to annul the marriage within 30 days if I chose. It stated that the debt attached to my family would remain erased regardless. It stated that my father, Giacomo Vella, would be legally barred from seeking me, contacting me, or claiming any future earnings under threat of prosecution, and an additional clause written in Italian that made my pulse spike. Any violation of this order will be treated as an act of hostility against the Bellomo family. I didn't know much about Mafia law, but I knew what hostility meant in Tony Bellomo's world. I sat down hard on the closet bench. My father was a cruel man, but he was also a coward. If Tony had placed his name between my father and me, the chain around my neck might have snapped. The door to the suite opened suddenly. From the outside, I stood so fast I nearly fell. My heart slammed against my ribs. Then I heard Tony's voice from the entry hallway. Not soft now, not patient now, but hard as cold steel. "Matteo," he said, "if I hear my wife's name spoken that way again, you will leave this house before sunset. Do you understand me?" A beat of silence. Then a man answered, shaken. "Yes, boss." Tony entered the bedroom a moment later and stopped when he saw me standing stiff beside the closet, clutching the annulment papers like a weapon. He didn't look surprised to see me afraid. He looked patient. "Good morning," he said. The steel vanished from his voice so quickly it almost stole my breath. I didn't answer. Tony's gaze dropped to the paper in my hand. "You found it." "Yes," I managed. You already signed it. I wanted you to know you have a door," he said simply. "Even if you never use it." I swallowed. "Why?" Tony exhaled slowly, as if choosing words that wouldn't break something fragile. "Because men like me are used to building cages," he said. "And I don't want you to confuse security with captivity." I stood rigid. Tony moved to the window and opened the curtains wider, letting morning light flood the room as if darkness itself had been part of the threat. "You slept?" he asked. "A little. That's more than most brides in this world get." I flinched at the bitterness in his voice. "Your staff, Valeria, she brought food." Tony nodded. "Good." Silence stretched. Then, because my fear needed somewhere to go, I asked the question that had been burning holes in my mind. What did you mean last night? That you saw me once?" Tony's gaze went distant for a second. "It was 2 months ago," he said. "Rain in Milan, near Porta Venezia. Gray streets, deep blue shadows, buses hissing, horns, the whole city loud enough to make a person disappear inside it. I had walked out of a meeting angry enough to break stone. My men were behind me. People moved away like I was a plague." He paused. "Then I saw you." My heart tightened. I remembered that part of Milan. I worked there sometimes, cleaning offices after hours. The buses ran late. Rain soaked you through even under cheap umbrellas. Tony continued, voice quieter now. "A boy ran in front of my car. He slipped. Fell. People laughed. They didn't help. They didn't want to touch him." His jaw flexed. "You did." My breath caught. I remembered. Not him. The boy. A skinny kid with a torn backpack, face streaked with rain and shame. He'd tripped near the curb, his book spilling into puddles. People had stepped around him like he was trash. I had been carrying groceries and my shoes had already soaked through. I'd been exhausted, angry at life, angry at being invisible. But when I saw the boy's face, something in me had moved. I had knelt, gathered his books, held my umbrella over him, told him to breathe, asked if he was hurt. Behind me, a black car had idled, engine humming like a threat. I had glanced up once, irritated, ready to snap at whatever rich man thought he could bully the sidewalk, and I had seen Tony Bellomo through the rain, sitting in the back seat, his face a stone wall, his presence so heavy it seemed to bend the air. I had looked away quickly, heart hammering. I hadn't thought about him again. Back on the streets, men like him were storms. You survived them. Tony watched my face as recognition dawned. You remember, he said. Yes, I whispered. His eyes softened in a way that almost frightened me more than coldness. You didn't look at me like I was disgusting, he said, or funny, or monstrous. You looked at me like I was there. My chest tightened painfully. Tony Bellamo, the man who controlled blood and money and fear, was admitting that being seen without cruelty mattered to him. He turned away from the window and looked at me with quiet gravity. I have spent my life being useful, he said, not being wanted. And when I saw you kneel in the rain for someone who could offer you nothing, I thought, if anyone deserves safety, it's her. My eyes burned. I forced my voice steady. Safety isn't the same as marriage. No, Tony agreed. But in my world, marriage is a shield people respect. That was the truth I'd feared. In his world, a wife was a symbol, a claim, a line others couldn't cross without consequences. And now I wore that symbol like a ring made of iron. Tony took a slow step closer, careful, as if approaching a wounded animal. I will not touch you, he said clearly. Not until you want it. Not ever, if you never do. My breath caught sharply. Then he added, but you will not be harmed, not by your father, not by the men he owes, not by the men who think my body makes me weak. A flicker of something dark crossed his face. And if anyone tries, they will learn what kind of strength I have. Fear and relief tangled inside me until I couldn't tell them apart. I should have hated him. I should have run. Instead, my voice came out like a broken thing. Everyone will think I'm yours. Tony's gaze sharpened. Let them, he said, as long as you know the truth. And what is the truth? I whispered. His voice lowered. The truth is that last night shocked everyone, he said. Even my own men, because they expected me to take what was given. That's what they think men like me do. He paused. But I don't want what is given in fear. The words settled into the room like a promise. And somewhere beyond the villa walls, I felt it, the ripple of consequence. Because a mafia boss refusing to claim his bride wasn't only gentle. In his world, it was dangerous. Over the next 3 days, I learned exactly how dangerous. It began with whispers. At breakfast on the first morning, Tony insisted I sit at the long table even though I wanted to disappear into the kitchen like I always did in other people's homes. The dining room was bright with lake light, too beautiful to match the life I'd entered. Servants moved quietly. A chef placed plates with careful hands, avoiding my eyes like I was either sacred or contagious. Tony sat at the head, cane resting beside his chair. He ate slowly, breathing heavier than most men even at rest. I noticed it the way you notice small things when you've lived your life reading moods for survival. Fatigue lived in him, not laziness, something deeper. Valeria stood near the door, her posture alert. 2 men I hadn't met yet, Matteo and Sandro, hovered farther back, their suits too tailored to hide the shape of weapons. I tried to keep my eyes down. Italian forks clicked against porcelain. Coffee steamed. The quiet felt too expensive. Tony broke it by asking, "What do you like to eat, Liliana?" I blinked. No one had ever asked me that, as if my preference mattered. Whatever is fine, I whispered. Tony's jaw tightened. No, he said. Not whatever. Tell me. My face warmed with something like shame. I forced myself to speak. Bread. Soup. Simple things. Tony nodded once to the chef. You heard her. The chef bowed his head and moved away. I stared at Tony, unsettled. Why are you doing this? I asked. Tony's gaze stayed calm. Because your father spent years teaching you that your wants are expensive, he said. I'm teaching you they're not. My throat tightened again. Matteo shifted at the back, expression unreadable. Later that day, as Valeria guided me through the villa's corridors, showing me the library, the garden terrace, the small chapel tucked in a quiet wing, I heard 2 maids whispering behind a doorway. He didn't touch her, one said in Italian, voice sharp with disbelief. Maybe he can't, the other replied with quiet cruelty. Look at him. Valeria's hand went still on the doorknob. I froze. The maids went silent when they noticed us, faces pale. Valeria turned, her voice soft and lethal. Pack your things, she said. You're leaving this villa today. The first maid stammered. Signora Russo, we didn't mean... Valeria's eyes didn't blink. You spoke about your boss's wife, with a mouth too dirty for this house. The maids began to cry. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, my chest twisted, not for them, for Tony, because I realized what he lived with every day, fear in front of him, mockery behind him. Valeria walked away with me without another word. My hands shook by the time we reached the garden terrace. Lake Como spread below like a silk sheet of blue. The mountains sat around it like silent guards. Valeria finally glanced at me. You're thinking you caused this, I swallowed. I didn't want them punished. Valeria's expression softened by half a degree. They weren't punished, she said. They were removed. For words? For disrespect, Valeria corrected. This house survives on loyalty, and loyalty begins with the mouth. I stared at the lake, dizzy. Is Tony angry? I asked quietly. Valeria's gaze followed mine. Tony isn't angry, she said. Tony is tired. Then she added, But he is very dangerous when someone confuses his tiredness for weakness. That night, someone tried to kill him. It happened at dinner. Tony had insisted I eat at the table again, though my appetite had shrunk into a knot. The chef served roasted fish with lemon, vegetables, bread warmed in a stone oven. I ate slowly, mechanically. Tony spoke little. When he did, it was practical. He'd be traveling to Milan the next morning for meetings. Valeria would stay with me. I could walk the gardens, read in the library, rest. I nodded, trying to be calm. Then a servant brought in a decanter of wine. As the man poured, I noticed something I shouldn't have. Not the color, the smell. Bitter almonds. My body froze. My mother had once told me, when I was very young, that bitter almond smell meant poison. She'd heard it from a neighbor who'd had a cousin in a hospital. Cyanide, she'd whispered, as if the word itself could kill. Maybe it was superstition, maybe it was myth, but the smell hit my nose like a knife. The servant poured into Tony's glass. Tony lifted it. I didn't think. I stood so fast, my chair scraped. "Don't," I said, voice louder than I'd ever used in this house. Every head turned. Tony paused mid-motion, his glass inches from his mouth. Valeria's hand moved toward her weapon instantly. Tony's eyes locked on me. "What?" The room held its breath. I swallowed hard, heart pounding. "The wine," I whispered. "It smells wrong." A flicker of irritation crossed Tony's face. Not at me, not at the interruption, but at the possibility. He set the glass down slowly. Valeria stepped forward like a blade and yanked the decanter out of the servant's hands. The man went pale. "I didn't... Signora, I swear..." Valeria didn't listen. She lifted the decanter to her nose, inhaled once, then her expression changed. She didn't gasp, she didn't shout, but the air went colder. Tony's voice lowered. "Sandro," he said. One of the men behind him moved. The servant tried to run. He made it 2 steps. Sandro caught him, slammed him against the wall, and held him there with one hand like the man weighed nothing. The servant wheezed, eyes bulging with fear. Tony looked at me. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. My throat was tight. "My mother, she used to clean houses for rich people," I said. "She said, sometimes rich people die quietly." She said, "Bitter almonds mean trouble." Tony's gaze sharpened with a strange mix of respect and something softer. Valeria set the decanter down. "It's laced," she said. Tony exhaled. Then he turned to Sandro. "Take him to the basement. Don't break him." "I want answers whole." The servant began to sob. Tony didn't look at him again. He looked at me. And for the first time since the wedding, the mask of ruthless calm slipped enough for me to see the truth underneath. Anger, not loud, controlled, directed. "You saved me," he said. My heart pounded. I shook my head reflexively. I don't know if you did," he corrected. Valeria's eyes flicked between us. Then Tony said something that made my stomach drop, and my blood run cold. "They thought my wedding night made me soft," he said. "So they tested me." I stared. "Who?" Tony's jaw clenched. "Someone inside my house," he said. "Someone close enough to my table to pour poison into my glass." The warmth in the dining room vanished. In that moment, I understood the real shape of my marriage. It wasn't only a shield for me, it was a target on both of our backs. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. Even with the key locked, even with Valeria's guards outside my door, my mind kept replaying the bitter almond smell, the servant's pale face, Tony's eyes when he realized he'd been inches from death. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway. My body went rigid, then 3 soft knocks. Valeria's voice. "Signora, are you awake?" I swallowed. "Yes." The door opened slightly. Valeria stepped in alone, closing it behind her. Her expression was unreadable. "Terry Santi is here," she said. He checked the decanter. It wasn't cyanide. It was something slower, enough to weaken Tony tonight and make the next attempt easier. My throat tightened. "So they'll try again?" "Yes." I hugged myself. Why would they do this now?" Valeria studied me, as if deciding how much truth a fragile girl could hold. "Because Tony refusing to claim you makes people think he lost control," she said. "In our world, control is currency. If someone believes he's weak, they will move to take what he owns." I stared at her. "And who would want that?" I asked. Valeria's eyes hardened. "Men who have waited years for a crack in his armor," she said. "Men who have mocked him behind closed doors while smiling to his face. Men who think a fat boss is a temporary boss." My chest burned with anger. Not for myself, for Tony. I surprised myself with the heat of my own voice when I asked, "Does he know who?" "He suspects," Valeria said. "But suspicion isn't enough. We need proof." I swallowed. Valeria stepped closer. "And you," she added quietly, "are more useful than they expected." I flinched. "I'm not," Valeria cut me off. "You smelled poison on a decanter before anyone else. You read rooms the way women who survived poverty read rooms. Tony noticed that." My throat tightened. Valeria's gaze held mine. "If you want to stay alive in this world, Liliana, you stop whispering when it matters." Then she left. I lay awake until dawn, hearing her words like a drum in my skull. Stop whispering when it matters. The next morning, Tony left for Milan under heavy security. He didn't ask me to come. He didn't want me exposed. He didn't want me used as bait. But in a way, I already was. For the next week, Villa Bellomo became a fortress. Guards doubled. Kitchens were inspected. Valeria cross-checked schedules. Servants were questioned. Tony called often, not to demand obedience, but to ask if I was eating, sleeping, coping. I hated how much those calls anchored me. I hated it because it felt like trust, and trust was dangerous. One afternoon, while I was in the library pretending to read a book I couldn't focus on, Valeria entered with a tablet and said, "Your father is here." My blood went cold. I looked up so fast my neck hurt. Valeria's face didn't change. "He came to the gate. He says he wants to see you." I stood abruptly. "No." Valeria nodded as if she expected it. Tony already told him no. Relief hit so hard my knees weakened. Then Valeria added, "But your father is not alone." My throat closed. "Who?" Valeria's jaw tightened. "Rocco Mazzini," she said. The name meant nothing to me at first. Then memory caught up. Rocco Mazzini was a loan shark from the outskirts, a man my father used to whisper about when he thought I was asleep, a man who broke fingers politely, a man who collected debts like trophies. I felt nausea twist. Valeria's voice lowered. "Rocco says he is owed something. He says your father's deal with Tony offended him." My eyes widened. "Offended him?" Valeria's gaze sharpened. "Your father owed money to more than one man," she said. "Tony erased his debt to the Bellomo family, but your father still owes others." I hugged myself hard. "And they think I'm collateral," I whispered. Valeria didn't correct me. "That's why Tony married you," she said simply. "Marriage puts you under Bellomo protection. It tells these men, touch her, and die." My throat tightened. My father had dragged me into a war I never asked for. Valeria's expression softened slightly. "Tony is handling it, but you need to understand something, Liliana." I looked at her. "In this world," Valeria said, "you are safer as his wife than as your father's daughter." The words sank into me like stones. That night, Tony returned unexpectedly. I heard the cars first, then the footsteps, then the low murmur of men across the hall. I sat on my bed, clutching the annulment papers in the same way someone clutches a lifeline they're too tired to swim toward. When Tony entered, his face was darker than I'd seen it. Not rage. Something controlled and heavy. He closed the door behind him and leaned on his cane for a moment, as if the day had cost him physically. "You're awake," he said. I nodded. Tony took off his jacket slowly and set it on the chair. His movements were deliberate, careful. I realized then that his size wasn't only mass, it was pain. Knees, back, breath, and still, he carried it like a king carries armor. "Your father came," I said. Tony's eyes flicked to mine. "Yes, with Rocco Mazzini." Tony's jaw tightened. "Yes." My hands shook. "What did they want?" Tony was silent for a beat. Then he said, "Rocco wanted to test the marriage." I swallowed. "How?" "He wanted proof that the wedding night happened," Tony said, voice flat. My stomach turned. The blood rushed to my face so fast it burned. I couldn't speak. Tony's eyes held mine. "I told him no," I whispered. "He'll think you're weak." Tony's mouth tightened into something like a grim smile. "Let him," Tony said. "He'll learn the difference between weak and unwilling." My throat tightened. "What did you do?" Tony exhaled slowly. "I offered him a trade," he said. "He leaves you alone forever, and I buy his debt book." I blinked. "You bought his debts?" Tony's gaze stayed cold. "Every man he owns, every family he squeezes, every soul he keeps in a cage. I bought it." The room spun slightly. "Why?" I whispered, stunned. Tony's voice lowered. "Because when your father tried to sell you, I saw how easy it is for men to treat humans like currency," he said. "I decided I would buy as many cages as I could, just to open them." My eyes burned. Tony Bellomo, the Mafia monster, had purchased a loan shark's empire not to profit, but to stop it. The world outside would never believe that. They would only see power, and that was the most terrifying part, because power in the wrong hands had destroyed my childhood. Power in Tony's hands felt like a door opening. I couldn't stop the words from coming out, raw and shaking. "Everyone thinks I'm trapped with you," I whispered. Tony took a step closer, stopping at a safe distance, as if he could feel where my fear drew lines. "No," he said quietly. "You're not trapped with me." He paused. "You're protected by me." My breath caught. Then Tony said the sentence that would ripple through Milan by morning and shock every man who had ever used marriage as a weapon. "I told Rocco something else," he said. "What?" Tony's eyes darkened, voice calm as a blade. "I told him if anyone asks about my wedding night again," he said, "I will treat it as an insult to my wife's dignity, and I will cut out the tongue that asked." The air went still. He wasn't threatening sex. He wasn't boasting control. He was defending my dignity with violence. And that, in a world like his, was a revolution. The next morning, the city reacted exactly the way Valeria predicted. They smelled softness, they tasted change, and they tried to take advantage of it. 2 nights later, I was walking the garden terrace with a shawl wrapped tight around my shoulders. When the first shot rang out, I froze. The sound echoed off stone. Birds erupted from trees. Somewhere inside, alarms began to wail. I didn't scream. I didn't run. Not because I was brave, because fear had trained me to go still first, to listen, to read. Valeria appeared instantly, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the villa entrance. "Inside," she snapped. I stumbled. What's another shot? Closer, then shouting. Men's voices, boots on gravel. Valeria shoved me through the doorway, threw me behind a marble column, and pulled her gun with fluid precision. "Stay," she ordered. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. I pressed my back to the cold marble and tried to breathe. Then I heard a sound that made my blood run colder than the gunfire. A man's voice saying my name. "Liliana." It wasn't Tony. It was my father. My stomach dropped. He was outside, shouting, panicked. And behind the panic, something else. As if he was performing. I peeked around the column before I could stop myself. Through the tall glass doors, I saw my father on the terrace, his hands raised, face twisted with terror. Behind him stood 2 men with guns, their heads covered. One of them shoved my father forward like a shield. My father stumbled, crying out, and then I saw it. The second man's gun wasn't aimed at Valeria's security. It was aimed toward the villa entrance, toward me. They were using my father to get close enough to shoot the bride. Because killing the bride would humiliate Tony Bellomo more than any bullet in his own chest. My hands went cold. I should have stayed hidden. I should have let Valeria handle it. But something inside me snapped. Not courage. Anger. Pure, bitter anger at the pattern of my life. Men using my body as a bargaining chip. My existence as leverage. My father's cowardice as a weapon against me. I didn't whisper. I moved. I grabbed the bronze decorative vase beside the column, heavy, ornate, and hurled it with every ounce of strength my years of labor had built. It crashed through the glass door with a shattering scream. The gunman flinched instinctively, head turning toward the noise. Valeria fired. 2 shots. Clean. Sharp. One of the masked men dropped. The other swung his gun wildly toward the entrance. I didn't think. I grabbed the broken shard of the vase's jagged edge and lunged low, the way my brother once taught me when I was 15 and a drunk man grabbed me behind the market stall. Aim for the soft. Use surprise. Survive. I drove the shard into the man's thigh. He screamed, collapsing. Valeria kicked the gun away and put her boot on his wrist, pinning him. My chest heaved. My hands shook violently now, adrenaline flooding me. My father stood frozen, staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Then, because my father was my father, his fear turned into accusation. "You!" he shouted, voice raw. "You brought this on us!" I stared at him, panting, blood on my hands that wasn't mine. "I brought this?" My voice shook with rage. "You sold me!" My father's face crumpled. "I did it to save us," he hissed. "To save your brother." My heart stopped. "What?" I whispered. My father glanced away. It was the same old tell, the same old cowardice. My blood went ice. "My brother," I repeated. "Where is he?" My father's mouth opened, but no sound came. Valeria's eyes sharpened with immediate suspicion. "What did you do, Giacomo?" she asked coldly. My father's face twisted. He's fine." "Where?" I demanded, voice rising. No whisper left. My father swallowed hard. Then, very quietly, he said the words that detonated my world. "I told Rocco. He could have Marco if he let the debt go." Everything went silent. The alarms, the lake wind, the birds, just blood roaring in my ears. I stared at him. I couldn't breathe. "You sold him," I whispered. My father flinched. "He's a boy. He'll survive." My fist clenched so hard my nails bit into my palms. Marco wasn't a boy. He was 19. He worked in a mechanic shop. He sent me money when he could. He called me Lily, like I wasn't a burden. He was the only reason I hadn't drowned in my own exhaustion. And my father had traded him like currency. Valeria spoke into her radio, voice clipped. "Lock the perimeter," she ordered. "Call Tony, now!" My throat tightened with panic. Tony was in Milan today. Meetings, security, he'd be hours away. And my brother was somewhere in the hands of a loan shark who collected souls. I didn't wait. I turned and ran. Valeria shouted my name, but I didn't stop. I flew through the villa corridors like a hunted animal, bare feet slipping on marble, heart screaming one word over and over. "Marco, Marco, Marco." I burst into my bedroom. yanked the safe open, grabbed the phone Tony left me, and dialed his number with shaking fingers. It rang once, twice, then his voice, low, controlled, answered. Liliana. Hearing my name and his voice cracked something in my chest. They took my brother, I choked out. My father. He sold him. Tony, please. The silence on the line lasted half a breath. Then Tony's voice turned into something I had never heard before. Not anger, cold certainty. Where? He asked. I don't know. I sobbed. Rocco, I'll handle it. Tony cut in. Lock your door. Stay with Valeria. Do not leave the villa. Tony, Liliana, he said, and my name in his mouth was a command wrapped in care. I promised you the nightmare ends here. That promise includes your brother. Then he hung up. I sank to the floor, shaking violently. That night stretched into the longest hours of my life. Valeria stayed with me, not comforting, just present like a wall. My father was taken to a locked room downstairs. I didn't ask what happened to him. I didn't care. At 2 a.m, my phone buzzed. I flinched so hard I nearly dropped it. Valeria nodded once. Answer. I did. Tony's voice came through, quieter now. I have your brother, he said. My breath left my body in a sob. Is he? He's bruised, Tony said. But he's alive. He's on a plane to Como now. He'll arrive in 2 hours. I covered my mouth with my hand, crying silently. Tony's voice softened by a fraction. Liliana. Yes, I whispered. I'm sorry, he said. I should have moved sooner. I underestimated how quickly your father would sell blood once he ran out of shame. My throat tightened. You killed Rocco? I asked, terrified of the answer. Tony's pause was brief. No, he said. That would be loud, and loud creates martyrs. My stomach turned. Then what? Tony's voice turned razor calm. I bought him, he said. The same way he thought he could buy your brother. I stared into the darkness, stunned. You bought him? I bought his men, Tony corrected. I bought the captains he paid. When I arrived at his warehouse, he was alone. My skin prickled. Tony's voice lowered. He begged, he said. He offered me everything. Money, territory, even you. My stomach twisted with nausea. And I told him, Tony continued, that a man who thinks a woman is currency isn't a businessman, a beat. He's a corpse waiting for permission. My heart hammered. I whispered, what did you do? Tony's answer was simple. I made him sign the transfer of his entire debt operation to my control, he said. Every ledger, every illegal note, every name. And then I made him sign his own confession to kidnapping and trafficking. He will spend the rest of his life in a prison that doesn't take bribes. My breath caught. Tony, that, he said quietly, is what I do with men who treat human beings like chips. The line went silent for a moment. Then Tony added, almost too quietly to hear, are you hurt? I swallowed, voice shaking. No. Good, he said. Then, softer, sleep, Liliana. Your brother will be home before sunrise. When Marco arrived, I almost didn't recognize him. His cheek was swollen, lips split. A knuckle scraped raw, but his eyes were what broke me, wide with shock, the same shock I'd felt in the wedding room. He stumbled into the villa foyer escorted by 2 of Tony's men, and when he saw me, he froze. Lily, he whispered. I ran to him. I didn't care who watched. I wrapped my arms around him so hard he winced, and then he hugged me back like he was afraid I'd vanish. He pulled away, staring at my face, at the ring on my finger. You married him, he breathed. I swallowed, throat tight. I didn't have a choice. Marco's gaze flicked past me. Tony stood at the end of the corridor, still in his travel suit, cane in hand, face unreadable. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. Marco's jaw tightened with protective anger. Tell me he didn't touch you, he said harshly. My face flushed with shame and fury. Marco, Tony moved then, slow and heavy, stopping several feet away again like he respected invisible lines. He didn't, I said quietly. Marco's eyes narrowed, confused. Tony's voice cut through, calm and steady. Your sister is safe, he said to Marco. No one will touch her without her permission. Marco stared at him like he didn't know what kind of monster to expect. Then Marco did something that shocked me. He bowed his head slightly, not deeply, not submissively, just acknowledgement. Thank you, Marco said, voice rough. Tony nodded once. That was it. No speeches, no demand for gratitude, just a man who had moved mountains on a cane and acted like it was normal. After Marco was settled in a guest wing, after Valeria assigned extra guards and a doctor, I found myself in the library again, staring at the fireplace without seeing it. Tony entered quietly. He looked worse up close, sweat at his temple, a faint tremor in his hand as he set the cane aside. The weight of his body seemed heavier tonight, as if the day had taxed him beyond pride. You should be resting, I said before I could stop myself. Tony's lips curved in something almost like amusement. So should you, I swallowed. What you did... For Marco, my throat tightened. You didn't have to. Tony's gaze held mine. Yes, he said simply. I did. I blinked. Why? He took a slow breath. Because you were never the problem, he said. Your father was. The words settled. I wanted to say I hated my father. I did, but hate didn't erase the grief. It didn't erase the years of wanting him to be better. Tony watched my face carefully. Then he said, "Sit." I sat, because my legs were weak. Tony didn't sit across from me. He sat beside the fireplace, far enough to give me space, close enough to feel like I wasn't alone. For a while we said nothing. Then Tony spoke, voice low. "My men are whispering," he said. I swallowed. "About what?" "About you," he said. "About me. About the wedding night." Heat crawled up my neck. Tony's jaw tightened. "They think I am failing to take what is mine." My throat tightened. "I'm sorry," I whispered reflexively, because apology was my oldest habit. Tony's head snapped toward me, eyes dark. "No," he said sharply. "Do not apologize for your body belonging to you." The words hit like a slap, in a good way, like someone shaking me awake. Tony exhaled slowly, calming himself. "I am not blind," he said. "I know what my size invites. Mockery, disgust, the belief that I am lazy, indulgent, weak, a beat. I have killed men for less than what they say about me," he admitted. My breath caught. Then he added almost bitterly, "But the truth is, most days I don't have the energy to care what they say. I have pain in my joints that never stops. I have lungs that work harder than they should. I have a body that people treat like proof of moral failure, as if they know my life by looking at my waistline." My chest tightened painfully. I whispered, "They're cruel." Tony looked at me. "They're cowards," he corrected. "Cruelty is cowardice with perfume." Silence stretched. Then I asked quietly, Why do you stay in a world that hates you?" Tony's gaze went distant. "Because I built it," he said. "And because if I leave it, men worse than me will take it and make it uglier." His eyes returned to mine. "And because I was lonely," he admitted, "until I saw you in the rain." My throat tightened. The fire popped softly, sending sparks that died in the grate. Tony's gaze held mine with quiet intensity. "I don't want to own you, Liliana," he said. "I want you to be safe enough to become yourself." I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know who myself was. I only knew how to survive other people's needs. Tony stood slowly, wincing subtly as his knee protested. He grabbed his cane, then paused. "If you want to annul," he said gently, "I will sign anything you need. If you want to stay 30 days, 90 days, a year, you choose. The only thing I ask is that you don't let my world teach you to shrink." My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I whispered, "Why do you care?" Tony's eyes darkened with something raw. "Because when I looked at you," he said, "I saw someone who has spent her whole life being used and still chose kindness. A beat. And I wanted to protect that," he said, "before someone breaks it." Then he left. And I sat alone in the library, heart pounding, understanding that the real danger wasn't his power. It was the fact that I was starting to trust it. Weeks passed, not in a montage, in slow, natural days where healing fought fear on the same battlefield. Tony returned to Milan often, leaving Valeria in charge. Marco stayed in Como, recovering, and somewhere between his bruises and my exhaustion, we began to speak about our childhood like survivors comparing scars. My father remained locked away until Tony decided what to do with him. I didn't ask. Part of me wanted him dead. Part of me wanted him to wake up and realize what he'd done. Tony's world didn't allow for that kind of softness. In Tony's world, consequences were the only language that stuck. I started walking the lake paths in the mornings. I started eating more than survival bites. I started reading books from Tony's library, Italian poetry, history, law, because the silence of Lake Como was so different from Milan's gray suffocation that my mind didn't know what to do with the space. And then, one afternoon, Valeria took me to the place Tony called sanctuary. It wasn't a prison. It wasn't even a villa. It was a compound of small stone cottages near the lake's quieter edge, surrounded by gardens and olive trees. Women worked there, women with tired eyes and cautious smiles. Children played. A nurse tended a little clinic. A classroom had chalkboards filled with handwriting. Valeria watched my face. "This is what Tony builds," she said quietly. "This is where he spends the money men think he spends on indulgence." My throat tightened as I watched a woman kneel to tie a child's shoe. "What is this?" I whispered. "A refuge," Valeria said. "For women whose families sold them. For girls who ran. For children who needed somewhere that wasn't dangerous." My eyes burned. Tony Bellomo, the monster, had built a shelter for women like me. My chest felt too tight. Valeria's voice lowered. "Tony doesn't talk about it," she said, "because men would call it weakness, but he doesn't care what they call it, as long as it exists." I swallowed hard. A little girl ran up then, hair in messy braids, face smudged with paint. She looked up at me and smiled openly. "Are you the new signora?" she asked. I froze. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't a signora. I was a sold girl wearing a ring. The child tilted her head. "You look sad," she said simply. My throat tightened. I forced a smile that felt like it might break my face. "I'm learning," I whispered. The girl grinned. "You can learn with us." she said, then ran away laughing. Valeria watched me with something like approval. Tony brought you here because he wants you to see something, she said. My throat tightened. What? Valeria's gaze turned toward the lake. He wants you to see that he isn't only what the city says he is, she said, and he wants you to understand something else. I looked at her. To the world, he's a monster, Valeria said. To you, he is trying to be sanctuary. My chest tightened. Why? I whispered again, because that question never stopped burning. Valeria's eyes darkened. Because Tony is lonely, she said, and you are the first woman who looked at him without disgust. The words hit deeper than I expected. That night, when Tony returned from Milan, he came to Sanctuary instead of the villa. He walked slowly along the lake path, cane tapping stone, his silhouette massive against sunset gold. I stood near the garden fence, watching him approach. When he reached me, he didn't touch. He didn't claim. He just asked, "Did you like it here?" I swallowed. Yes. Tony nodded, as if that mattered. He looked out over the lake. I built it after my first wife died, he said quietly. My breath caught. I hadn't known he'd been married before. Tony's gaze stayed on the water. She was arranged too, he said. She hated me. My throat tightened. She called me disgusting, he said, voice flat. Not because I hurt her, because she couldn't stand the idea of being seen beside a man who looked like me. My chest burned. Tony's jaw tightened, as if the memory was an old bruise. She ran the first chance she got, he said, and I let her. Because I knew she would kill herself slowly if she stayed. I swallowed, heart aching. What happened to her? I whispered. Tony exhaled. She died 2 years later, he said. Not by my hand. Fever, illness. But when I heard, I realized something. He turned his gaze to me. You can't force love, he said. You can only force proximity. My throat tightened. So, I built Sanctuary, he said. Because if my life was going to be surrounded by forced things, I wanted at least one place built on choice. My eyes burned with tears. Tony's voice lowered. And then I saw you in the rain, he said. And I thought, maybe I could build choice for you too. The sun dipped lower. The lake turned to molten gold. I couldn't speak. Tony looked at me, eyes dark and steady. You're still afraid, he said. My throat tightened. Yes. Tony nodded. Good, he said. Fear keeps you honest, but you're also becoming angry. I blinked. Tony's mouth curved faintly. I saw you throw a vase through a door, he said. That wasn't fear. Heat crawled up my neck. Tony continued calmly. That was a woman who is tired of being used. My throat tightened. And that woman, Tony said, voice low, is someone I respect. The word respect hit me like a shock. Not pity, not obsession. Respect. That night, for the first time, I walked back to the villa with Tony without feeling like a prisoner being escorted. I still didn't trust the world, but I was starting to trust him. And in Tony Bellomo's world, that trust became the most dangerous thing either of us could carry. Because once you trust, you can be hurt. And because men watching from the shadows could smell trust the way wolves smell blood. The next attack came during a gala in Milan. Tony didn't want me there. He argued with Valeria and Marco and even Veronica, his attorney, in a closed room I overheard because the villa walls carried sound like secrets. It's a risk, Tony said. She's already a risk, Valeria replied. She is my wife, Tony snapped. Marco's voice cut through. Exactly, he said. If you keep hiding her, men will think she's fragile. They'll come harder. Silence. Then Tony's voice, quieter, colder. Or they'll think she doesn't exist. Valeria answered softly. She exists. I stood outside the door, heart hammering, fingers pressed into my palm. Then I did something I never did. I opened the door without being asked. 4 heads turned toward me. Tony went still. I stepped into the room, voice trembling but audible. I'm going, I said. Tony's jaw tightened. No. I swallowed hard. You married me as a shield, I said. Then let me be one. Tony's eyes darkened. I won't use you, he said, voice rawer than I'd heard. I shook my head. You're not using me, I said. They are, the men who will attack me whether I'm hidden or not. I took a shaking breath. And I'm tired, I said quietly, of being something that happens to. Silence stretched. Tony looked at me like he was seeing the woman behind the whisper. Then he nodded once, slow. Fine, he said. But you stay within 5 steps of Valeria. Valeria inclined her head. Understood. Tony's gaze held mine. And Liliana, he added softly, if at any moment you want to leave, you say the word. What word? I whispered. Tony's throat worked. Home, he said. My chest tightened painfully. And because I didn't know where home was anymore. But when Tony said it, it sounded like a place I might someday have. The gala in Milan was everything I hated. Marble floors, bright chandeliers, men in suits smiling like predators, Women dripping jewels and cruelty. Cameras flashed. Music played. Laughter sounded too sharp. Tony entered beside me and the room shifted, not because of me, because of him. He was enormous in his tailored suit, cane in hand, face carved into cold authority. Men moved aside. Conversations died mid-sentence. Eyes tracked him like he was weather. And then the whispers began. His bride. She's young. She looks poor. Why her? Did he buy her? I felt heat rise in my face. Valeria's hand touched my elbow lightly. Breathe, she murmured. Tony's gaze didn't flicker toward the whispers, but his jaw tightened. We reached the center of the ballroom, where a rival family's envoy stood waiting. A tall man with sleek hair and a smile too bright to trust. Vittorio De Santis. I recognized the name from the way servants whispered it like a curse. He stepped forward, hand extended toward Tony, smile polite. Bell'uomo, he said. Congratulations. Tony took his hand briefly, crushing his fingers just enough to remind him who controlled the grip. DeSantis, Tony replied. Vittorio's gaze slid to me, and the smile sharpened. So this is the bride, Vittorio said. She's delicate. Something in his tone made my stomach twist. Tony's voice stayed calm. She's strong, he said. Vittorio chuckled softly, as if Tony had told a joke. Of course, he said. Then his gaze lowered to Tony's body, subtle but deliberate. And you, my friend, look healthier than ever. The insult was wrapped in politeness, like poison in wine. Tony's eyes went cold. Then he did the last thing I expected. He turned to me, and he offered me his arm, not as a claim, as an invitation. I hesitated only a second before looping my hand through his. His arm was solid, warm, heavy with muscle under softness. The room's whispers sharpened. Vittorio's smile faltered. Tony leaned slightly toward me and murmured in my ear, low enough for only me to hear. Lift your chin, he said. I did. Tony's voice stayed quiet. They are watching for fear, he said. Give them pride. My throat tightened. I forced myself to breathe. Vittorio's gaze narrowed, assessing. Then he said softly, Tell me, Signora, what happened on your wedding night? The ballroom went silent. Even the music seemed to fade. My blood went cold. The question wasn't curiosity. It was a test. A trap. Because if I answered shyly, he'd smell weakness. If I answered intimately, he'd claim scandal. If I refused, he'd claim Tony had failed. Tony's jaw tightened. I felt his arm tense under my hand. He was about to speak, but I remembered Valeria's words. Stop whispering when it matters. I looked Vittorio De Santis in the eyes, and I smiled. Not sweet, not polite, steel. What happened on my wedding night, I said clearly, is that I slept without fear for the first time in my life. The silence turned electric. Vittorio's smile froze. The room, full of predators, didn't know how to react to a bride who didn't blush with shame. Tony's gaze snapped to me, something fierce flickering there. Vittorio recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. How touching, he said. But I know what you meant, I cut in, voice steady. And you don't get to ask. A few gasps rippled. Vittorio's eyes narrowed dangerously. Tony's voice dropped into ice. You heard my wife, he said. Walk away. Vittorio's smile vanished. He leaned closer, voice sweet enough to poison. Careful, he murmured. Women who speak too loudly in this world tend to disappear. My heart hammered, but before fear could tighten my throat, Tony moved. He didn't lunge. He didn't shout. He simply stepped between us, a mountain blocking the sun. And he said, loud enough for the whole ballroom to hear, Any man who threatens my wife is volunteering to die. The room went silent. Even Vittorio De Santis stepped back, because in that moment, Tony's size wasn't a joke. It was a warning. The gala ended early, not officially, but the air had changed. Men left in clusters, whispering. Women watched me with new eyes, some resentful, some curious, some quietly aching with recognition. On the drive back to Como, Tony said nothing for a long time. Valeria sat in front, eyes on the road. Marco sat beside her, jaw tight. I stared out the window at Milan blurring by in gray rain. Finally, Tony spoke, voice low. You shouldn't have answered him. My heart sank. I turned toward him, shame flooding. I'm sorry, Tony cut me off. No, he said. Don't apologize. I froze. Tony's gaze stayed forward. I meant, he said more quietly, you shouldn't have had to. My throat tightened. Then Tony added, almost reluctantly, but what you said. He paused. It shook the room, he admitted. My chest tightened. Good, I whispered. Tony's mouth curved faintly. Yes, he said. Good. That night, back at the villa, Tony didn't go to the study. He came to my door and knocked softly. My My heart hammered. I opened it a crack. Tony stood in the hallway, cane in hand, expression controlled. "I won't come in," he said quietly. "I just need to tell you something." I swallowed. "What?" Tony's gaze held mine. "Vittorio will move," he said, "after tonight. He will see you as leverage." My stomach turned. Tony's voice lowered. "If danger comes," he said, "I need you to trust my commands." I swallowed hard. Then, because I didn't know how to be anything but honest, I whispered, "And what if your commands trap me?" Tony's expression tightened. "Then you have my permission to disobey," he said. The words hit like a shock. "I don't understand," I whispered. Tony's voice was low, raw. "Liliana," he said, "I have controlled men with fear my entire life. I don't want to control you with anything." My throat tightened. "I want you," he said quietly, "to stay because you choose." I stared at him, heart pounding. Tony hesitated, then added, almost like it cost him pride, "Tonight, when you spoke to Vittorio, I was proud." My breath caught. I couldn't speak. Tony lowered his gaze. "Sleep," he said. "Lock your door. You're safe." Then he turned and walked away, cane tapping softly, leaving me standing in the doorway feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not safety. Not fear. Power. The kind that comes from realizing you can speak, and the world listens. The war came anyway. It came in quiet sabotage first, shipments delayed, accounts frozen. Rumors spread that Tony was too soft now that he had a bride, that his health was failing, that his men were restless, that a fat boss couldn't keep control forever. Then it came in blood. A week later, Sanctuary was attacked, not with guns, with fire. I woke to Valeria pounding on my door. "Get up," she snapped. "Now." My heart slammed. I grabbed the phone, shoved on clothes, and followed her through the villa corridors where alarms screamed. Outside, the night sky glowed orange in the distance. Smoke rose over the lake. Sanctuary. My breath caught. Valeria dragged me into the car before I could think. Guards piled in. Tires screamed against gravel as we raced down winding roads toward the compound. When we arrived, the sight broke something in me. One cottage was burning, flames licking the roof like hungry tongues. Women screamed. Children cried. Guards fought to control the chaos. Nurses carried supplies. The air reeked of smoke and terror. I ran toward the children without thinking. Valeria shouted, but I didn't stop. I grabbed a little girl with braids, the one who'd called me Signora, and lifted her into my arms. She clung to me, sobbing. "It's okay," I whispered, voice shaking. "It's okay," but it wasn't. Tony wasn't here. He was in Milan, and Sanctuary, his one place of choice, was being punished. I felt rage rise so hot it made my vision blur. A man's shout cut through the chaos. "Behind the clinic!" Valeria sprinted that direction. I followed, heart pounding. 3 masked men were near the back fence, trying to drag a woman into a van. The woman fought, shrieking. The men laughed. Something snapped inside me. I didn't whisper. I didn't freeze. I moved. I grabbed the nearest tool, an iron rake leaning against a shed, and swung it with every ounce of desperation in my body. The metal hit a man's shoulder with a sickening crack. He screamed, stumbling. The other man turned, gun rising. Valeria fired faster. He dropped. The third tried to run. Marco, who had followed us, limping but furious, tackled him to the ground with a roar. The woman sobbed, collapsing. Shaking, I stood there, chest heaving, hands trembling around the rake. Valeria turned to me, eyes sharp. "You're learning," she said simply. I stared at her, breath ragged. "This is his sanctuary," I whispered, rage burning. Valeria nodded. "And that's why they attacked it," she said, "because it hurts him." My throat tightened. I looked at the burning cottage, at the children huddled in blankets, at the women with smoke-streaked faces. Then I said something that surprised even me. "Call Tony," I said. "Tell him I want to speak to him." Valeria's brow lifted. "Now?" "Yes," I snapped. Valeria studied me, then nodded. She handed me her phone. Tony answered on the second ring. His voice came through, sharp with tension. "Valeria, it's Liliana," I said. Silence. Then Tony's voice softened instantly, dangerous in its own way. "Are you hurt?" "No," I said, voice tight. "But Sanctuary is burning." The silence on the line felt like a knife. Then Tony's voice turned quiet. "A dead man's fire," he said. I swallowed. "They tried to take women," I said. "They tried to take children." Tony's breath was heavy through the phone. "I'm coming," he said. "No," I said sharply. Silence. Tony's voice darkened. "Liliana, listen to me," I said, voice shaking but loud. "You built this place because you didn't want forced things, and now your enemies are using it as bait." My throat tightened. "They think you'll rage," I said. "They think you'll kill openly. They think they'll paint you as a monster." Tony's breathing was steady, controlled. "And what do you think?" he asked. I swallowed hard. "I think you should let them underestimate you," I said. "And I think I can help." Silence. Then Tony's voice lowered. "How?" I stared at the burning roofline, rage sharpening into clarity. "I grew up with a father who lied for sport," I said. "I know how desperate men move. I know what they think they can get away with." I took a shaky breath. "Let me be visible," I said. "Let them come for me, and then we catch them clean." Valeria's eyes widened slightly. Marco swore under his breath. Tony's voice went very still. "No," he said. I swallowed, heart pounding. "Tony, no," he repeated, harder. "I will not use you as bait." My throat tightened. "You already married me as a shield," I snapped. "Let me act like one." Silence. Then Tony's voice softened dangerously. "Liliana," he said, "I did not save you from a cage just to build you into a weapon." My chest ached. "Then don't," I whispered. "But don't treat me like glass either." Silence. Then Tony exhaled slowly. "I'm coming," he said again. "We talk in person." He hung up. Valeria took the phone back, eyes studying me with something like respect. Marco stared at me like he didn't recognize the sister who used to whisper apologies for breathing. "You're insane," he muttered. I looked at him, tears burning. "I'm tired," I said. And somehow, that was worse than insanity. Tony arrived at Sanctuary before dawn, his convoy cutting through fog like knives. He stepped out of the car in a long coat, cane in hand, face carved into stone. When he saw the burned cottage, his jaw tightened. When he saw the children wrapped in blankets, his eyes darkened. When he saw me standing beside Valeria, soot in my hair, hands scraped, he froze. He moved toward me slowly, not to claim, to check. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, voice low. I shook my head. "No." Tony's gaze swept over my scraped hands, the soot on my cheek. Then, because he couldn't help himself, he murmured, "Why do you look like you punched a war?" I huffed a laugh through shaking breath. Because I did. Something rare, flickered in his eyes. Pride, then it vanished behind cold purpose. He turned to Valeria. "Who?" Valeria's voice was clipped. "3 men, 1 alive. He's in the van, tied." Tony nodded once, then began to walk toward the captured man. I grabbed his sleeve before I could stop myself. The fabric under my fingers was thick, expensive. Tony paused and looked down at my hand like it surprised him. I swallowed hard. "Don't kill him," I whispered. Tony's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because I want everyone to know you're not a monster," I said, voice shaking. "And because if you kill him, they'll say Sanctuary deserved it." Tony's eyes held mine, heavy with the weight of war. Then he nodded once. He lifted my hand gently off his sleeve, as if my touch mattered. "You're right," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked toward the captive. The interrogation was not loud. Tony didn't shout. He didn't hit. He simply stood in front of the masked man tied to a chair inside a burned-out cottage, cane in hand, and asked, "Who sent you?" The man spat blood. "A fat pig," he sneered. "You think marriage makes you holy?" Tony was silent for a beat. Then he said softly, "No." He leaned closer, voice low and deadly calm. "I think your mouth is the bravest thing about you," he said, "because your body will start confessing when your courage runs out." The man's eyes widened with fear. Tony glanced to Valeria. "Bring in the ledger," he said. Valeria handed him a folder. Tony opened it and read something inside. Then he looked at the captive again, voice quiet. "Vittorio DeSantis," he said. The captive's eyes flicked away. Tony nodded once. "That's your answer," he murmured. He stepped back, cane tapping wood. Then he did something I didn't expect. He looked toward me, and he said, loud enough for his men to hear, "My wife will not live in fear because of cowards." My throat tightened. Then Tony turned back to the captive. "You will leave here alive," he said, "and you will carry a message." The captive stared, confused, terrified. Tony's eyes turned to ice. "You tell Vittorio," he said, "that if he burns my sanctuary again, I will burn his entire bloodline's future." The captive swallowed hard. Tony's voice stayed calm. "And you tell him something else," he added. The captive's chest heaved. Tony's gaze flicked to me once. "You tell him," Tony said quietly, "that my wedding night shocked everyone because I chose restraint. A beat, and now he will learn what happens when I stop choosing it." The message traveled through Italy like wildfire. Within days, Vittorio DeSantis moved openly. A shipment convoy was attacked near Como. 2 of Tony's men were killed. A warning was left on the road. A wedding veil soaked in blood. When Valeria showed it to me, I almost vomited. Tony looked at it and didn't blink. Then he burned it, personally, with a lighter over the sink. He watched it curl into ash. Then he turned to me and said, voice low, "He wants a reaction." My throat tightened. "And what will you do?" Tony's eyes darkened. "I'll give him one," he said, "but not the one he expects." The trap came together slowly, across days, the way real plans do. Tony didn't rush. He built a net. He moved shipments as decoys. He planted false information through a captain he suspected of being compromised. He increased my security publicly while quietly lowering it in one specific place to lure Vittorio into thinking he had a window. That place was a boat dock on Lake Como. Vittorio believed Tony would take me there for a romantic display, to restore his image after rumors that he couldn't claim his wife. Vittorio thought he could take me on the dock and humiliate Tony. Tony thought differently. On the evening of the trap, I wore a simple coat over a dark dress. No jewelry except my ring. The ring that started as a price tag had become something else, an emblem that made wolves circle. Tony walked beside me, cane tapping wood, his massive frame wrapped in a dark coat that made him look like a moving shadow. He didn't touch me, but his presence was a wall. "You can still say no," he murmured when we reached the dock, and the lake wind lifted my hair. I swallowed, heart pounding. "I'm not saying no," I said. Tony's gaze held mine. "You're afraid," he said. "Yes," I admitted. Tony nodded once. "Good," he said. "Then you're alive." We stepped onto the dock. Water slapped gently against posts. The villa lights behind us glowed in warm gold. The night smelled like lake water and pine. The lake was all soft orange reflections and dark emerald edges. It would have been beautiful if it hadn't been bait. Valeria's men were hidden in the trees. Marco stood farther back near the boathouse, gun tucked under his coat, jaw tight with protective rage. Tony led me down the dock like he was walking to confession. Then a voice came from the darkness. "Well, well," Vittorio DeSantis said, stepping into the dock's lamplight like a snake enjoying the sun. The happy couple. He wasn't alone. 6 men behind him, guns visible. My throat tightened. Tony didn't stop walking. He leaned slightly on his cane, posture calm. "DeSantis," he said. Vittorio's gaze flicked to me, smile sharp. "Signora," he purred. "I must say, you look more alive than you should." My heart hammered. Tony's voice dropped. "Walk away." Vittorio laughed. "I asked you once," he said, "about your wedding night." Your wife answered with pride. His gaze turned cruel. "So allow me to ask again," Vittorio said softly. "Did you finally take her, Bellomo? Or are you still too tired?" The insult landed like poison. Tony's jaw tightened. I felt his anger like heat off stone. Vittorio took a step closer, voice lower. "Perhaps," he said, "you should give her to a man who can satisfy her." My stomach turned. My hands shook, but I didn't whisper. I looked Vittorio in the face and said, "You talk about women like objects, because you're afraid of what one looks like when she's free." Vittorio blinked, surprised. Then his smile sharpened. "Ah," he said, "she has teeth." Tony's gaze flicked to me, something fierce flickering. Vittorio's men shifted, guns raising slightly. Tony's voice dropped into ice. "Now," he said. Valeria's men emerged from the trees like shadows cutting loose. The first shots hit Vittorio's men, not killing. Disabling. Chaos erupted. Men shouted, guns fired. The dock splintered under bullets. Tony grabbed my arm, not harshly, but firmly, and pulled me behind a wooden post. For the first time, his touch felt like pure protection. Vittorio lunged toward me, intent on taking his humiliation prize anyway. I didn't freeze. I shoved my hand into my coat pocket where Valeria had placed a small blade earlier. I pulled it out and slashed at Vittorio's wrist as he reached. Blood sprayed. Vittorio screamed, stumbling back. His eyes met mine, shocked, because he expected the bride to be soft. He expected the sold girl to be helpless. He expected the monster husband to be the only threat. He didn't expect the wife to fight. Tony moved then like an avalanche. He grabbed Vittorio by the collar with one huge hand and slammed him against the dock post with a force that made wood creak. Vittorio choked, eyes wide. Tony's face was inches from his. "Listen to me," Tony said quietly. Vittorio spat blood. "Fat." Tony tightened his grip. The word died in Vittorio's throat. Tony's voice lowered. "I let the world think my wedding night made me gentle," he said, "because it kept my wife alive long enough to become herself." Vittorio's eyes widened with fear. Tony's gaze flicked to me once. Quick, intense. Then back to Vittorio. "And now," Tony said calmly, "you will watch her walk away from you." Tony shoved Vittorio to the dock floor. Valeria's men restrained him, forcing him to his knees. Marco stepped forward, gun aimed. The lake wind whipped through all of us like a witness. Vittorio glared up at Tony, breathing hard, humiliated beyond repair. Tony stood towering over him, cane in hand, face cold. Then he did something that shocked everyone again. He didn't kill Vittorio. He turned to Valeria. "Call the police," he said. Valeria blinked once. Tony's jaw tightened. "I said call," he repeated. Valeria obeyed. Vittorio's eyes widened with disbelief. "You're handing me to the law?" Tony's voice stayed calm. "I'm handing you to a cage you can't bribe," he said, "because death is easy, imprisonment is humiliation." Vittorio began to laugh, broken, bitter. "You think the police will keep me?" Tony's gaze darkened. "Not the police," he said. He leaned down slightly. "The evidence I built will," Tony murmured. The trafficking ledgers, the sanctuary attack, the attempted kidnapping, the weapons, the bribes recorded. Vittorio's face went pale. Tony straightened. Then he turned to me, and in front of men bleeding on the dock, in front of Valeria and Marco, in front of that whole rotten world collapsing in on itself, Tony Bellomo asked me quietly. Are you okay? My throat tightened. I nodded once. Tony's expression softened by half a degree. Good, he said. Then he took a slow breath, and his voice lowered so only I could hear. You did well, he murmured. The words hit like warmth in winter. Because no one had ever told me I did well for surviving. They only told me I did well for obeying. The aftermath spread across weeks. Vittorio DeSantis was arrested, not by local cops, but by national investigators Tony had quietly fed evidence to through intermediaries who didn't owe Mafia families favors. His house was raided, his ledgers seized, his allies scattered like rats. Tony's men whispered, stunned, because they expected blood. They expected a massacre to reassert dominance. Instead, Tony used the law like a weapon, a smarter violence, a cleaner one, and it worked. In the months that followed, Sanctuary rebuilt. The burned cottage became a new clinic. The children painted murals over scorched stone. The women planted flowers where ash had been. Sim and I changed too, not suddenly, not magically. Slowly, the way real healing happens when fear stops being daily food. I stopped tucking my hands away. I began wearing my hair down sometimes. I began speaking louder in rooms. I began laughing again, in small bursts at first, then more. Tony watched it all without demanding, without claiming. He simply made space. One evening in early autumn, Tony asked me to walk with him along the lake's edge. The sun lowered over Como like honey. The water reflected the sky in soft blue. We stopped at the place where the dock path curved toward Sanctuary. Tony's breath was heavier tonight. He leaned on his cane more. His face looked older in the fading light. You're tired, I said quietly. Tony huffed a faint laugh. Always. I swallowed, watching the lake. Do you regret marrying me? I whispered. Tony's gaze snapped to mine. No, he said instantly. A beat. Then he added quieter. But I regret what it cost you. My throat tightened. Tony reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to me. I stared at it. My name was written on it, Liliana. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a passport, a new one, a thick fold of money and a key, and papers for a small house, white stone, near a quiet village. Far enough from Milan's gray, and far enough from Mafia wars. Tony's voice was low, raw. The dead is gone, he said. Your father is gone. Your brother has a job here if he wants it, or somewhere else if he doesn't. Sanctuary will protect women with or without you. My throat tightened. Tony! Tony forced himself to keep going, voice steady. You're free, he said. I promised you a door. This is it. I stared at the key in my hand, feeling the weight of possibility. Tony's eyes darkened with something like fear. I know you stayed because you had nowhere else, he said. I know my world is heavy. I know my body is not what women dream of. My chest tightened sharply. Tony swallowed, jaw tight like the words hurt to say. Go find a life that isn't a prison, he said quietly. You deserve a man who isn't a beast. The sunset softened behind him, turning his face into warm shadow, and suddenly I saw him the way I'd never allowed myself to see. Not as the Mafia boss, not as the shield, not as the mountain, but as a lonely man offering freedom because he loved me enough not to trap me. My eyes burned. I stepped closer. Tony went still, watching me like he didn't trust hope. I held up the key. Then I set it back into his palm. His eyes widened slightly. Liliana, he said, voice tight. I took his hand. His hand was huge, warm, rough with small scars. A hand the world feared. A hand that had only ever steadied me. I lifted it slowly and pressed it to my cheek. You think you bought my body, Tony, I whispered, voice shaking. But you're the only man who ever bothered to save my soul. Tony's throat worked. I stepped closer, keeping his hand there where his warmth could reach me. I could hear the heavy, steady heartbeat under layers of power. I'm not going anywhere, I whispered. For the first time, I'm finally home. Tony's breath shuddered. His arms came up slowly, carefully, as if he was afraid to break me even now. He held me, not tight, not possessive, just there, solid, warm, alive. The lake wind moved around us like a blessing. Somewhere behind us, Sanctuary's lights glowed in the gathering dusk, proof that choice could exist even in a world built on force. The world would keep telling the story wrong, of course. They would say a poor girl was forced to marry a fat Mafia boss. They would say she was a victim. They would say he was a monster. They would laugh behind hands and whisper behind closed doors. But I knew what happened on our wedding night, the thing that shocked everyone. He didn't